أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم صلوات Allah mentions, and we've heard this verse many a time, that Allah tells mankind that we have created you in diversity in gender, diversity in different tribes and nations. Why? So that you may know one another. But then Allah continues and says that the best, the most honorable of you are those who are God conscious, those who are mindful of God, those who are aware of God. It doesn't matter what gender you are of. It doesn't matter of what culture you come from. But what matters is how conscious you are of God, how connected you are with God. And how do you do that unless knowing our own self? You see, sometimes we get bogged down with us identifying ourselves with either gender, us identifying ourselves with either culture, that we are of a certain culture. And this is utilized and weaponized by people across the board in all parts of the world. I am British. What does it mean to be British? And this is really a nuanced discussion. What does it mean? Is it a piece of paper? Is it how do you define? If you look at it, the most popular food in Britain is a curry, which is an Indian dish. So really, this is quite paradoxical that we call ourselves British or whatever it may be, right? What is it that is our culture? And really, what boils down to it is, as soon as we become egoistic about certain identities, that takes us away from being God mindful. That takes us away from being conscious of God. Or I'm a man, or I'm a woman, or I'm of this culture, I'm of this tribe. As soon as that happens, that I-ness becomes a block to becoming at one with the reality. We look at history, and it's really interesting because the Quran time and time again tells us about people that have passed. Siru fil ard, travel in the land. See what has happened to those before you, those who have denied the signs of God. And in Surah Yusuf, Allah says, "Inna fi qisasihim la'ibratun li'ulil albab." In their stories is a lesson for those who use their brains. For those who have passed before us, we look at how dynasties have risen and fallen. And we don't need to look far. Look at the tradition within Islam. You see, after the first four caliphs, there is the Umayyad dynasty. The Umayyad dynasty rises and then it falls. Then we have the Abbasid dynasty. And we have all these different dynasties that are coming within their cultural contexts and expressing their form of Islam within different expressions of culture. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We have created you in tribes and nations so that you may know one another. How bland it will be if we only had one tribe. And Allah mentions, if we wanted you, لَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. If we wanted, we'd have made you one community. Right? But as we travel, as we look around us, as we learn from everything around us, we see that there's so much richness in that. I didn't know the color orange, but I looked at in the culture and I saw how they utilize that color, being metaphorical in this instance. And I appreciate from the different cultures, the different ways and the different expressions of talking, of speaking, of eating, of interacting. And in that it builds my richness, that I'm able to then understand the divine reality by looking at different expressions. I'm able to understand my own self more by taking a different vantage viewpoint. just by understanding others, just by looking at others. And this is in our own lives when we start to speak to others, even if it be from our own culture, that we see things from different perspectives, from different viewpoints. It opens up horizons that we would never have thought about. Allah has given this beauty so that we may take advantage of it. You look at, for example, the way the Islamic empire has expanded over many, many centuries. We look at, for example, the Abbasid period, and we have the Fatimid period, where in North Africa, Egypt, those sort of areas, we had a Shia sort of dynasty. Then we look at the Ottomans, we look at the Safavids, and we see the impact all these different cultures have had on people, how they have borrowed from other cultures, how they have impacted. Sometimes till today we see the remnants of this in our practices, in certain strands of Islam or certain expressions of Islam. All these are there, and it's really interesting to observe them. Allah mentions stories in the Quran of history, of historical. You may ask, what's the use of talking about those communities that have passed? But Allah says that in them there is a sign for those who utilize their brain, for those who utilize their intellect. And Allah mentions many other nations that have passed before, that aren't existent today. And in them, there is a lesson for us to reflect upon, to look at. You look at the Abbasid period, and we're going to be celebrating the birth of the 8th Imam, Imam Rida, alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We see at this period is the Abbasid period. And in the Abbasid period, there is, at one point under Ma'mun and later on, there is what's established, the Baytul Hikmah, the house of wisdom. And what was done in that period is that many books were translated from Greek and from other languages. Now what's happening is another culture is being brought in, their books are translated. What happens in certain nationalistic ideologues, and this is throughout history, I am of this culture, I am of this land. Any immigration, any outsiders need to be removed. And what happens in that instance, if you think about it, it's nearly impossible to do that. Despite figures being peddled in the news, etc., it's a near impossible task. We live in a very different world today. And these scaremongering tactics have been used in history. Anyway, what's happening in this Abbasid period is that books are being translated. And what happens naturally is that there is, it's translated into Arabic, and the Islamic scholars are picking on them, learning from them, expanding them. So you see a huge expansion in the different sciences, in mathematics, in astronomy, in logic, in philosophy, in theology. There is a huge advancement. People are interacting with these texts, learning from them, and giving back. And then it has an impact on society. And not only does it have a direct impact on that society, it has an impact on societies beyond that and times that come after. In fact, some historians mention that when Europe was in the Dark Ages, this translation movement had an impact and brought Europe out of the Dark Ages. It influenced the Renaissance period. So we see how culture goes through lands, is picked up, is learned from, is expanded, and who does it benefit? It benefits everyone around. In this very period, we also see, and it's very interesting to see how dynasties rise and fall. We see in this Abbasid period later on how, for example, the Mongols come, and there's another culture that is coming. And this is, the Mongols come, they send an envoy to the Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mu'tasim, I believe, to which the reply is, they kill the envoy. And the Mongols were not known for their mercy. They pillaged the land. So when they came, and again, this is history, and history has different viewpoints. So there may be other viewpoints to this historical narrative. But anyway, the Mongols, some narratives mention the Mongols come to Baghdad, and Baghdad is this rich, flourishing land where there's a lot of scholarship. Scholars from all over the world are coming, translation is happening, lots of interaction of sciences. The Mongols come to Baghdad and they ransack Baghdad. They kill, in some accounts, hundreds of thousands, in some accounts, millions of people. Books are thrown into the river Tigris, buildings are burned, Baghdad is ransacked, and some accounts mention that the river became so black because of the ink from the books. Why? Because there is now an ego that is coming. The leader at the time said, "No, I'm not going to, do what I have to do." There's an ego clash between two different egos, and what happens is many suffer in between. We look at this identity, and this identity is something that people tend to hold on. At this time is Imam Rida in this particular Abbasid period, going back in history now, before the ransack of Baghdad, and how he is composed, and we'll talk about him a bit later on. But something reminds me of a hadith al-Qudsi, of standing up. Sometimes people get scared of standing up to what is right, of whoever is doing wrong. Because of our mind, we project an image in our mind that if I do this, maybe I will lose something. But if you think about it, this is an image that we have made up in our own mind. Hadith al-Qudsi says, "Yabna Adam, la takhafanna min dhi sultan." O son of Adam, don't be scared of any authority. Madama sultani baqiya, as long as my authority is established and is continuous. Wa sultani la yanfadu abada, and my authority never diminishes. And we tend to fall into this. We tend to fear, we tend to think about reprisals. But Allah is telling us, don't fear anything. Have submission to me. Ya ibn Adam, la takhafanna min dhayq al-rizq wa khaza'ini mil'anun or mali'un. O son of Adam, don't be fearful of loss of wealth or constriction of your risk, of your wealth, whilst my treasures are ever flowing. وَخَزَائِنِي لَا تَنْفَضُ أَبَدًا, and my treasures are ever flowing. يَا ابْنَ آدَمْ لَا تَطْلُبْ غَيْرِي, O son of Adam, don't seek other than me. وَأَنَا لَكَ, and I am for you. فَإِنْ طَلَبْتَنِي وَجَدْتَنِي, if you seek me, you will find me. We just need to take that step. Learn from the lives of the Ahlul Bayt, learn from the lives of the prophets before us, of those people who had fully submitted to the will of God, regardless of what situation there was. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين أما بعد أوصيكم عباد الله وأوصي نفسي بتقوى الله فإنها حصن حصين. I exhort myself and exhort all of you to be God wary, to be God mindful, to be God conscious, for that is a strong fortress. And we find this verse that we mentioned in the start, that we have created you from different tribes, from different genders, so that you may know one another. And Allah continues, the most honorable of you is the one who is God conscious, the one who is mindful of God. We find this, and talking about the different dynasties that have been there within Islam, we talked about culture and how culture is something that's very fluid, and culture is something that shouldn't be some where we bring about our ego into it. That I am of this culture, of I am of this nation, or I am. It has been weaponized. It is weaponized till today. Even religion, the same thing. I am of this religion and everybody else is going to hell. This shouldn't be. Taqwa, being mindful of God, is something that you leave the I. There is no I left. This I that we identify with is something very interesting. And we spoke about culture in the Western, or rather what was considered at that time the Western part of the world. In the Eastern tradition, you look at the Vedantic, you look at the Chinese tradition, you have notions of the I that is very interesting, of the mind and the soul. In the East, in the Western, the Muslim sort of arena, we see that influence from Greek philosophy coming in, and Muslims are now engaging with the notion of this I. We see that they're discovering and distinguishing and having debates and discussions around this notion about God, His attributes, etc. And one of these scientists is that, or philosophers, is called Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina posits that imagine a person who is floating in space, who has no knowledge of the world. He has no senses, he can't feel, he can't see, he can't smell, he can't touch. He has nothing. Yet even in that situation, he will acknowledge that he is a being. Now, in the Eastern tradition, you have a similar discussion. In the Vedantic tradition, we have this non-dual notion. Who are you? Are you the body? Well, we know the body rots. We know sometimes we go to sleep. We know sometimes a person has a near-death experience. So you aren't the body. Are you the person that is aware of the body or looking at the body? Are you even that person? And in the Vedantic tradition, there is a witness. We find similarities within Islam and in the Islamic tradition. Being aware of yourself, being cognizant of yourself. Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbah. He who knows himself has known his God. And taqwa is knowing God, is being cognizant, is being mindful of God at each situation, of being where you ought to be, in your mind also, and externally. Because sometimes in our mind, we may be in the masjid, but our mind is somewhere else, right? So being aware of this, and sometimes we make a story that I am rich, they are poor. I am Muslim, they are not Muslim. I am of this culture, they are of that culture. I am British, he is not. What happens? You've identified with that ego. And that's where the problem comes. And how can a person be connected to God when they have that ego? Look at Fir'aun. Ana rabbukumul a'la, as the Quran says. I am your high Lord. And the Quran mentions, Kam taraku min jannatin wa uyun. How many gardens did they leave behind? وَزُرُوعٍ وَمَقَامٍ كَرِيمٍ. And vegetation, cultivation, and high statuses they've left behind. وَنَعْمَةٍ كَانُوا فِيهَا فَاكِهِينَ. All the ni'mah that they were given, that they used to enjoy, how much of them have they left behind? Fir'aun. He was the king of the kings. He had everything. Yet he is nowhere. He is taken by the sea. Right? This I, that I am this, so I am that. How long will it last? Today we are here, tomorrow we are gone. كَذَلِكَ وَأَوْرَثْنَاهَا قَوْمًا آخِرِينَ. We made others inherit his land, Fir'aun, who had everything. فَمَا بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاءُ وَالْأَرْضُ وَمَا كَانُوا مُنْظَرِينَ. The heavens and the earth did not cry for him, neither did we wait for him. If your time is there, it's there. You're going to be gone. I'm going to be gone. What have we done for that? There's an incident that we talked about Imam Rida alayhi salam, that he was now the heir apparent in the Abbasid, under the Abbasid Caliph. And of course there's politics going on there. Where Ma'mun made Imam Rida his heir apparent for political expediency. He is in this situation. So I liken it today to being a vice president or deputy prime minister, that sort of second in command. So in that tradition, some of you may have experienced in the Middle Eastern tradition, there is the hammam, what we would say a sauna. So it so happens that they would visit the hammam and they would have a bath, and somebody would scratch your back and you scratch someone's back. So Imam Rida enters, and you're just wearing like a cloth, yeah? She enters this sauna, and there's a guard there, one of the royal guards, soldier. He calls out to Imam Rida. He doesn't know it's him. He said, "Come here, scratch my back." So Imam came. He's the heir apparent. Yeah, he's second in command. So he scratches his back. All of a sudden, someone comes and says, his face changes. "Do you know who that is? That's second in command." Soldier starts shaking. Imam says, "Don't worry. I'll scratch your back. You scratch mine." He didn't say that. I'm paraphrasing. But what happened there? We see the same thing in the Prophet. He would sit amongst the poor and the orphans. He would take, there was no I. There was nothing. He just did it for the sake of God. And likewise, we need to look within. Do I have something within myself? Oh, this person is coming to shake my hand. I can't shake his hand. Or I can't say salam to him or to her. Or I can't do this. This is beyond me. I can't do this job. There's an I that comes in. I can't go to this place. This is someone's place. Right? This is what, and we find this in many traditions, dissolving this ego, this fana fillah, being at one with God, being aware in the Vedantic, being the witness in the Tao, in the Taoism, being at that at one with the one reality. We have this in different traditions, in different expressions of being at one. You see, Allah, when He's talking to the angels, He says, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, and I blew into man my spirit. And only when that was done, فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ, fall into prostration. We all have this, and the analogy is given that imagine these buckets, and in the buckets there's water, and these buckets are reflecting the sunlight, right? Now, the analogy is used in a different example, but we could use it in this way, that we have water, and sometimes the water is murky. We can't reflect that reality. Sometimes the bucket gets broken. But it boils down to ourselves. How much of the divine reality are we manifesting? Are we reflecting? Have we covered it up with so many things that prevent us from manifesting it? As the Hadith Qudsi mentions, Al-Qalbu Haramullah, that the heart is a sanctuary of Allah. فَلَا تُسْكِنْ فِي حَرَمِ اللَّهِ غَيْرَ اللَّهِ, and don't make anything be in that sanctuary of God except God. So this is something for us to reflect upon. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المؤمنين والمؤمنات. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على There is a dear brother of ours whose grandfather has passed away. There is our dear Zinat and Sarah's grandmother who's passed away. There's another brother who's undergoing an operation in London. Let us remember all of them and all marhumin, all those around the world, in whatever situation they are, with a Surah Fatiha. Bismillah. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد المصطفى وعلى أئمة المسلمين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. صلوات.